I got a couple of questions I want to ask.
Okay.
The questions I want to ask is about our family, where they come from, and both sides of the family, basically, from grandmom's side and great great grandmom, great great grandpas. You can start from there, and
Uh,
like the year, the 18th century, stuff like that.
okay. Starting um, in terms of the family line, this is just basically a brief introduction. You have to start with the slave routes, and maps have
Can I
been.
see that, Unc? Like, can you like, can I like look at it as you,
Okay, yeah, you can look at it.
like this? So,
This is basically put together by the African Slave Trade database, and what it shows you is the slave routes coming from both West Africa as well as Southeast Africa to the Americas, which includes Brazil, Central South America, and the United States. And it shows the journeys made by the ships, and then the ships returning, which is the green line here, to Europe. Now, one other thing that people also leave out is that there's ships that went from the African continent to Europe.
so right here.
Yes, right there. Right there. And basically, these are the routes coming from Angola, the Congo. Your major basin is what they call the Gulf of Guinea and all the states along Guinea, as well as the Goree Islands, which is pointed out here, to the Canary, which was like a stop off point, and to Europe. This also shows the ships returning from the Caribbean. One of the islands here is the island of Santo Domingo, all with their cargo. What I mean, cargo of sugar, molasses, coffee, silver, and gold to Europe. This I found to be a very interesting map. This is a 15th century map of West Africa. Some of it includes the empires of Mali, Ghana, and as you can see, there are different people who are depicted here on the map. One interesting person that many people have heard about is Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa is on the map. To me, he's almost symbolic of what I call almost a treasure map, meaning X marks the spot where the gold is. So if you're looking for the gold in Africa, it's with it's Mansa Musa. Now another record that I came across with from the island of St. Croix, and I was gonna. It says here the U.S. Virgin Islands, but that's just when the records were compiled. However, at this time, in 17, in June of 1778, it's actually the Danish Virgin Islands, and the Danish West Indian Company, and this is basically an announcement that would have gone in the paper about a slave sale or a slave sale slash auction. And is this a list of an announcement of the slaves that have been auctioned off and available for sale And it also has, it also, if you're able to read Danish and you, um, when I first saw these records, it's actually easy to read on a desktop because you can actually enlarge it and you'll actually see the word Guinea. So there's a designation that this ship came from Guinea. We can also translate that to mean the Gulf of Guinea. This here, some of you have seen this before. This is just a plan of a slave ship from 1822.
1822, y'all.
And this is how this slave, this is a diagram
The diagram.
telling you the construction of the ship, how the slaves were placed, and the different shackles
It's a sardine can.
that was used,
Look at the shackles, man.
that you shackle the slaves together.
It's modern day. It's the same thing with the handcuffs. No difference.
Again, and what you're looking at here is basically a picture of the Virgin Islands, and the Virgin Islands includes all the islands in the Virgins, which is both the British and U.S. Virgin Islands. There's also a territorial boundary line between the Virgin Islands, so we always think of the Virgin Islands as the main islands of St. Thomas, St. John, St. Croix, and in the case of the British Virgin Islands, Tortola, and the Virgin Gorda, but there are hundreds of islands in the Virgin Islands. This here is actually a newspaper article, a print from the St. Croix Axis of 1848, and it's basically an announcement that the governor of the Virgin Islands have signed the decree to free the slaves of the Virgin Islands. And it goes through details and it actually discusses that the slaves are now free and that they now have to be paid. And there is a negotiation in terms of how the slaves are to be paid. This happens to be just an updated.
Thank you so much, brother. We are gonna keep the work up. We, we are gonna keep the work up. This is my uncle. I love him so much. He's dropping knowledge, wisdom, and understanding based on slavery and just giving us a rough outlook on things. It's a really good some information. So I'm gonna let him go. We're gonna keep working. So all the information that I get from my uncle, and it's a strong bloodline here. Go ahead, do your thing.
Okay, and as I've mentioned earlier about the provision, basically it talks about the Declaration of Emancipation.
Of which one? 1840. This is
The
1848.
Declaration of Emancipation, sorry, from 1848, and it talks about henceforth and forward, henceforth and going forward. On July 3rd, 1848, slavery was abolished in the Danish West Indies. Abolition was the result of a successful slave revolt, and on the, it says in the island, it says just in St. Croix, but it should be in the island of St. Croix, where thousands of slaves gathered in the town of Frederickstad to demand their freedom. It doesn't really mention, but also part of that slave revolt meant the burning of the plantations, meaning burning of the
Sugar cane.
sugar cane and the plantations. This, and this precipitated the emancipation of 1848. The original royal edict from the governor was that the slaves were to be freed by 1949, except all newborns who were immediately freed.
So you're saying
No, 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 let me finish. But the enslaved on St. Croix were not satisfied with the emancipation and staged a rebellion. So what I'm saying is that the original edict is that the slaves were to be freed in 1949. However, the slaves were not satisfied and they demanded freedom immediately.
immediately.
Right, and as the slave revolts, like I said, which included the burning of these slave
The plantations.
plantations, the slaves were freed in 18.
So it was a it was a rebel. It was a rebel.
Right, right.
Sort of like a civil war.
It was a rebellion. Yeah, it was a civil war. The civil war between the slaves and basically the governor of the island.
And that was who? The Danish?
Exactly.
It was the Danish.
The Danish. So the slaves were not. So the governor of the Virgin Islands didn't say, "Well, we'll free the slaves in 1948." Edict said that they would be freed in 1859. However, the slaves were not satisfied. They revolted in 1847, and the decree was put out on July 3rd of 1848 that the slaves were to be free.
So it's safe to say that it's safe to say that the slaves that was on the Virgin Islands, were they free before the proclamation in United States?
Yes.
So
yes.
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 So
yes. You have had.
So
yes, I've seen Virgin Islands.
so the Virgin Islands was free.
But you have to remember that that's a point that's made. However, it's actually taken out of context because the Virgin Islands did not become part of the United States officially until 1917. So to say that they were free before the slaves in the United States, who were officially freed in 1863, were officially free in 1865. I'm not saying that it's misleading, but you have to add more to it.
Right.
So if the U.S. Virgin Islands is not a part of the United States until 1917, and to say that the slaves got their freedom before they got their freedom in America, they weren't really a part of the United States.
Right.
They were under the control of the Danish.
The Danish.
The Danish.
The Danish.
At that time.
At that time.
Yes.
And the British had their hand in it too, right? Or just was the Danish?
At that time in 1848, the islands had changed hands between the French, the Danish, the British, and the United States. I've heard mention of another European country, but safe to say I don't have documentation of that, so I only deal with what I have in terms of records. So I know of 4 countries. Some say there were 5. So I know of the French, the United States, the British, and the Danish.
So are we done with this topic right here? This is good content? Or you still want to go? Or you want to do something later on?
This is good content from here because henceforth, because going forward, what you're looking at really is...
My question is, was our family slaves. Were we slaves in St. Thomas? Did we come off the boat as slaves? Did were we slaves?
Okay, let's. You have to take a look at it this way.
Or were we free?
Let's take a look at it this way. You've got the family, the family of the Stevens and the Monsantos, which is my mother from the Monsanto side and my father from the Stevens side of the family. There are family members that came as slaves. There are family members that came directly from Portugal
Portugal.
to the U.S. Virgin Islands. There are family that came from Spain to Puerto Rico. So we have family members who came as free Europeans. We have family members who were mulatto and free, and we also have family members who were slaves.
My question is, were we slaves? I'm just asking the Monsantos.
Actually, if you have to take the Monsanto, you have to remember the Monsanto family name comes directly from Portugal.
Portugal.
So the Monsantos, the male line of the family, are European or mulatto, and in most cases, not all, they were free. There were some mulatto Monsantos who were slaves, but not all. So to say who's slave, who's free, you have to really look at the records.
Was
The same, let me finish.
Okay.
The same with the Stevens line of the family. I have records of Stevenses who were free. I have other records of Stevenses who were listed under the slave rolls. So when you start talking about the islands are different when dealing compared to the U.S. You can literally look at many islanders as having three branches of their family. European, not all exclusive. European, mulatto, and black, or descendants from the African. So to say who's free, who's not free, who's slave, who's not slave, you have to look at the records. You can't specifically say
and pinpoint.
you can't pinpoint. You can't, because for me, you have to remember, I'm a researcher. And as a researcher, all we do is research. And all we do is collect a good researcher.
Evidence. Facts.
Collects the facts. We don't interpret the facts. We don't change the facts. We don't mix the facts. We don't hide the facts. We don't change the facts. The facts are the facts. I've heard multiple stories, but if the facts don't lead me that way, if the paper is not here, I need to see in black and white.
Okay.
Okay? Because I have registers here. Let me pull out a register.
My uncle is dropping knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. So, you know, I'm gonna keep it real with you.
Actually, I'm gonna take a look at a register right here.
From my point of view, we wasn't slaves. When our ancestors came from Portugal, they was Jewish and they was Hebrew. Okay, they probably fled over there because that's when the time where a lot of Jewish and a lot of a lot of Hebrews was getting persecuted for being Jewish. So they fled over here on boat. And when they docked over there, my uncle got information saying that we contribute to the synagogue being built in St. Thomas right now. So to me, we was free. And that's on my grandmother's side. She's a Monsantos and spoke Spanish too, because the Portugal, they speak Spanish. They speak Spanish. They of that Spanish. They of that Spanish. You know what I'm saying? Bloodline. So when my uncle was dropping down on me, is actual true facts, but he's gonna continue, or you done,
No, I'm not done. I'm going to go back again. As I said, as a researcher,
So
I don't put, as a researcher, I research.
you research.
I pull the records. I pull the facts. Um, if I find that a family member is a slave, there's no knock on that family member. If I find that that family member was free, that doesn't put them in a higher position.
Yes.
That's just that's what it is. We can't control the
Right.
past.
But did you find any of our family members as slaves?
I'm getting ready to pull that record.
Okay.
Um,
Now this is all organic right here. All organic. This is my aunt. So he's a big researcher, and he collects the facts.
like I said, I collect
You know,
facts.
he collects facts. He put it together, and that's what he do. So
Now, now, now,
this is what it is.
as my nephew had mentioned, we're part of the Monsanto um, on the maternal side. The paternal side of my father is Stevens. I have a copy from the St. Croix. Again, it says U.S. Virgin Islands, but it says U.S. Virgin Islands for the purposes that it's under the Ancestry Library of 2018. But St. Croix was not part of the U.S. Virgin Islands
At that time.
at that time in 1818. So I find a family member, because my father's a Stevens, of a John Stevens, age 20, taxable Negro, status enslaved. And it lists the name of his owner as well as the residence. So if you ask me for a record, this is the record. However, we can find other records that, we have other records that list other family members. And again, I have to say, as a researcher, what I do is look for records. I don't change records. I don't interpret records. I don't look for. So what it is, what it is that you can't look for something that's not there. Some of us may be, some of us want to, sometimes we want to rewrite history
Right.
and say we're all not, we were all free. No, we weren't all free. The islands, meaning, the islands are very unique. Unlike the states. You say you have family members who are Monsanto, who are white European, their children mulatto, and then you have Monsantos who were slaves. You have Stevens family. That shows you a record of a Stevens who was owned in 1818, and he was a taxable slave, which means your slave was your property, and the revenue for the island came from taxing your property. Just like here in the United States, where in some counties and cities, they will tax your car, and you pay an annual tax on your car, which is considered a property. So the history is interesting. Um, my nephew again asked me if I could find a record, and so yes, I did find a record. But then we can also have records of, as I shared with my nephew, of slave auctions and slave sales, and so that's what I was able to present.
But what about Puerto Rico? That whole thing about Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, I'm still looking at Puerto Rico again. From what I do have and what we're able to find, is that we have a great grandmother on our father's side of the family who was born in Puerto Rico, and she has relatives that came directly from Spain. I haven't quite found specifically where, whether it was from the peninsula or from the Canary Island, that requires a little more work. But um, our great, I was my great grandmother, to be my nephew's great great grandmother, is from Puerto Rico. She left Puerto Rico and went to the U.S. Virgin Islands, and we see her in the 1901 U.S. Virgin Islands Census at the age of 10, and we also have other records um, of her. And when I mean the Virgin Islands, is that she actually went to the island of St. Croix. We have a record of her from the 1911 census. The census then is not the U.S. census, but is a Danish census from the Danish West Indies. It was taken on the island of St. Croix. Our my great grandmother is listed here, Felicita Williams, born where? Born Puerto Rico.
Where? It says Puerto
It
Rico?
says Puerto Rico,
Where?
right? It says Puerto Rico right here under this column.
Right
Where
here?
born? Yes,
Right here?
right there. It says Puerto Rico,
Where? Point to it.
right there. Where my finger is, it says
Oh, right there.
PTO Rico, Puerto Rico.
Yeah, you see it, you all right?
It says, if not born in the Danish Virgin Islands, the year of settlement here. She settled in 1901. My
I said Puerto
grandmother,
Rico.
right, my grandmother, Mariah Andrews, is born in St. Croix, and she's 5 years old at that time.
So, you 25% Puerto Rican.
Uh,
Because,
as I've given the breakdown, without doing a genealogy study, we are 25% Hispanic. And what I mean by that is I have a great grandparent from Puerto Rico on my father's side. I have a great grandparent on my mother's side of the family from Portugal. Portuguese people are Hispanic. They are not, quote, Latino. So if you combine, a great grandparent means if you, a parent, okay, so basically the way it works is if I'm going back in order, my father, if I am 1/8, which is 13%, my father is 25%.
right.
Then his mother is 50%, and then her mother is 100%. So as you go down the line, you keep having the percentages. Same
Right.
thing with my mother. My mother is 25% Portuguese.
Right.
So that would make, you have to have that, and that makes me 13%. So when you add the 13% and 13%, that comes out to 1/4. The other,
What about me?
okay, so we then have to add all of those numbers. So you would be 8%. So if you would have 13, basically 7.5, 7.5, you would be 1/8. So if I'm 25%, you as a nephew would be half of that, which would be 13% or 1/8.
So I'm 13%
Right.
Hispanic.
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 That's a big percentage.
Hispanic. Yeah, that is a big percentage.
That is a big percentage.
Big percentage. Now, there's also, since we and since on my mother's side of the family, her grandfather is Portuguese. So we have to break down that percentage. So that means Her father is 50% Portuguese. So no. Let me, father. Okay, I'll stay with that, and I'll go back to what I really wanted to say. Um, and so that's how the percentages break down.
Okay. So
Now being from Portugal, they were also Sephardic.
Sephardic,
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 Sephardi,
Hebrew.
Sephardic, Sephardi, Hebrews. And in terms of Sephardi, her grandfather is 100%. So her father is 50%. My mother is 25%, and that would make me 13%. So each generation going down, you have to have that unless you mix with the person who has your same percentage.
So, but regardless of what, I'm still a descendant.
Right. So yeah, so you're still a
The
descendant,
blood is still there.
still there. Now the other 67%, since I've traced going all the way back, comes from West Africa. It comes from Guinea. So Guinea could be a part of the Guinea Empire, which was the Empire of Ghana. Now, specifically, what group I haven't locate that specifically, but I'm clear in terms of the records because that's what I found.
Wow. Okay.
And all of this is without doing a quote a DNA
Right.
test.
Wow. That was really really powerful. You know. There you go. My uncle just gave it up, and that's the bloodline right there, y'all. You know, we finally did what we needed to do. My uncle got a lot of history. That's why I'm down here is to connect with him because he got a lot of information that I need for myself. Also want to pass it on to my son. Also, me and my aunt, we will be doing a family trip. We going to Puerto Rico, hopefully, Lord willing, and we going to St. Thomas, and hopefully we're gonna hit Tortola. So we definitely gonna do that, and it's just us searching for information and knowledge so we can pass on to the next generation so they can carry the information on. That's exactly what I'm doing. Just came across your live, just saying hi. How you doing, man? How you doing? So, um, this is what I'm doing. I love my uncle. I love being a Sephardic, Jewish, Hebrew, and I got a rich bloodline, and I'm gonna uphold this bloodline all the way.
Oh, let me hold on. Keep
So
talking.
my
Keep talking.
uncle is about to drop some more
Keep
information.
talking. I just want to share one of the
So
records.
he not done yet.
Since nephew talked about Sephardic,
Hold
about
on.
Jewish,
Yeah.
this is a registry again from the island. This is a registry of the inhabitants. No, that's good. This is a registry of the inhabitants in the town of St. Croix, and it gives the specific house number and street. Now, it lists the inhabitants. These are all Monsantos. It's difficult to see and read on this particular page.
So this is Monsanto's.
Right. Now, I've
Hold
seen
on.
this.
Let me see.
You could, if you,
It's
if
all right here.
yeah, all right there. Now, what I did right here was census of 1870, and it says religion, and that's the religion it mentions, Israelite. Now, also be aware that the way this registry is done, the top part is the family, and the second part are the servants.
Who's the servants over there?
The
Where?
servants, it lists right here. It lists here. I wrote it there. Servant. Servant.
Servants.
Servant of the family.
So we had servants.
The Monsantos had servants.
Oh, sweat.
Okay?
Wow. There you go. There you go, y'all. This is my family right here. This is all big facts, all big truth. My uncle just gave it up.
Yeah,
Religion was Israelite.
and if you can see clearly, their designation is different. Here you can see servant. If you, without even being able to read Danish, you can just see the spelling is different, and then they included it. So this is how the registries are done this way. You get the family members, and then the servants are listed on the bottom. And you have one servant of the age of 18, another 40, another age 36.
Oh, you see the age? I see it right
Yes.
there.
Yeah, you see the ages.
36.
And without even, like I said, and just by looking at this, without even being able to read, you could see that this is a completely different spelling. Now, I looked at this under a microfiche and I enlarged it. So it was a lot easier for me to read. If you were tempted to read this now, but this is a 1870 census. It tells you here a register of the inhabitants in the town of Charlotte-Amalia. Charlotte-Amalia is the town on the island of St. Thomas.
Wow.
And as next to me said, and what I say, as a researcher, I collect information. I don't interpret. I don't rewrite. I don't change. I don't alter. I don't rewrite history. I just collect
Thank you so.
the information in black and white.
Thank you so much. Bloodline, family, bloodline, and family are important, but our faith is more important. Yeah. Like I said, I'm a Monsanto's Sephardic Jew, right? In Hebrew. I'm Hebrew. I can trace the bloodline all the way back to Hebrew. So you already know what the Hebrews are. They are the direct ancient, from the direct ancient ancestors that didn't speak. They became Hebrew later on, but they are from the uply God right ones. Before there was Jews or Christians or Muslim or anything. That's that same bloodline descended. Yeah. So it's really, really important. So you guys know. Give a big shout out to my uncle right here. Give a big shout out to him. Yeah, that's my uncle. Yes. So, thank you so much. I just want to share that with y'all. And to all my Boricuas, peace, y'all. Later. Mwah.